Sarah Schreier. She's the executive director of the Fraser River Sturgeon Conservation Society. It's a research-based nonprofit charitable organization dedicated to the recovery of the Fraser River White Sturgeon population. And for over 20 years, Sarah has been providing analysis and advice to a number of organizations and sectors related to healthcare, basic research, and fisheries management issues. In her presentation, Keeping the Legend Alive, Fraser River White Sturgeon, she'll share the story of this majestic white sturgeon of the Fraser River. This is the last truly wild population of this species in the world, and she'll be talking about its important place in the ecosystem. Although sturgeon are a robust species and hardwired to survive, apparently they've been the same for about 1 million years. They have
5 million, yeah, absolutely.
Unbelievable. They do have significant issues impacting their long-term survival. So Sarah's going to be talking about ongoing conservation efforts to restore and protect the sturgeon for generations to come. So I'm looking forward to hearing about this wonderful fish. I understand they can live to be 150 years old.
They definitely, they're an extraordinary species. The Fraser River White Sturgeon is it's an amazing species. It's a passion, and I'm excited to be here tonight to share with you a little bit about this fish and the work that we do. And thank you, Elizabeth, for reaching out and inviting me, and James for helping me with the tech side. And I'm really hoping it still works.
Well, I'm sure it will.
From our conversation. But yeah, I just thought I'd share a little bit about who we are, what we do, and I'll flip through my slides fairly quickly here, and then just answer questions, because I like that. If there's especially given the areas that you're interested in, and particularly in Delta and the lower part of the Fraser, those are special spots for sturgeons. So I'm happy to answer questions to the best of my ability. And if I can't, I know people who can.
Yeah, that's great. So people use the chat function to record their questions, and then Sarah will go through them after her presentation.
That would be great. Awesome. And believe me, I love the energy. And I just signed in just a short moment ago, a little while ago, and you guys are awesome. And I'm so looking forward to this, and I will talk to anybody who will listen to me. So thank you so much for having me. So I'm just going to share my screen, and let's just, so is that, can you see my slides?
Looking good.
Does that look right, Jim?
Yep, that looks good.
All right, perfect. So my presentation is Keeping the Legend Alive, and it's a little bit of it's a little tongue-in-cheek, and I try to be not too cheeky, but you know, it happens. But this fish is truly an iconic species in the Fraser River, and I also work with some extraordinarily iconic people. So the legends pervade throughout all of our the work that we do. Okay, I'm just gonna, there we go. So, whoops, sorry guys, there we go. So white sturgeon. So it is one of the oldest species in the Fraser. You're right, Elizabeth, we're talking over 65 million years. They're unchanged. They can be 200 years old. They've outlived 2 ice ages. It's really an extraordinary species. They're unlike any other there. They, from a physicality perspective, they don't have scales. They look more like sharks. But they don't have teeth, so, you know, don't worry, they don't have teeth. But they use both fresh and salt water, similar to salmon, but they also share critical habitats. So when you're talking a little bit about, you know, impacts to development, and the lower part of the Fraser is such an incredibly industrial working part of the river that, you know, these are areas that sturgeon share with salmon and illican and other species. They're also very slow growing. So they will reach reproductive maturity at 26 years for the females, 12 for males, but they only spawn every 6 to 10 years in the wild. So it's really already a species that's behind the 8 ball. However, they're also very opportunistic. So if the conditions aren't quite right for them, they'll hold off for those few years in between. So again, you don't outlive 2 ice ages without some hard wiring to survive. So they do depend on shared habitat. And from what our science is saying, the juvenile fish, the little ones, the ones that are the next generation, are the ones that are on decline. They're really, or in decline rather, and it's a challenge. It's been shown now year after year with our analysis, but there is hope. But just to back up a little bit of history here, if you don't know where you've come from, you don't know where you're going. And that was really the approach that the Sturgeon Society took when we started many, many years ago. In 1892 and 1920, over 7.5 million pounds of sturgeon were landed and recorded in the West. Now, this was a fish that, much like other natural resources, the species was the backbone of this province. They helped to grow and develop this province. These fish that you're seeing here in these images, they're upwards of 200 years old. These are 20-foot fish, and fish that are, in many cases, the bigger fish, because of course, in many species, females get bigger, and it's no different for sturgeon, and they're full of caviar. So for the meat in Canada, they were a huge export for British Columbia, Canada, and really helped to build this province. Then in the early 90s, many fish were found dead on the shorelines, and these were found by fishers. It was very disturbing. These were big, old, mature fish, and many of them were female. And fortunately, really was a perfect storm. So although we don't know exactly what killed them and why they died, we had a year where there were very, very warm waters. And it was a year. So about fish were analyzed in their the were analyzed, that they were full of sockeye. And so because there was low water and it was warm water, there's not a lot of oxygen, yet they're absolutely down for the fish. Sockeye is a little bit like gorging yourself and not to digest. And that's
We're having a little trouble with your sound there, Sarah. I'm not sure why.
Yeah, I can't hear it either. It's back, and even the video is freezing and unfreezing.
I think she just got dropped.
Might be a good idea if everybody turns their video off. That kind of cuts down on the total network traffic.
It's also possible that if she shuts her video off, the audio will be much better.
Can you guys hear me now?
We can hear you now, yeah.
Okay, I just switched up the network that I was using, so hopefully that should be okay. I'll go back to my share screen and keep your fingers crossed.
Okay.
I'm in Harrison Hot Springs in the Fraser Valley, beautiful area, but sometimes the Wi-Fi can be wonky. Can you still hear me and see me?
Looking good. You're looking good.
Okay, excellent. All right. So as a result of seeing all of those fish die off in the 90s, Rick Hansen, our man in motion in Canada, who's most famous for wheeling around the world in a wheelchair, he also a long-time conservationist. He fishes for salmon and sturgeon, and he works quite tirelessly for seeing the long-term sustainability of these species. Can you guys still hear me?
Yep.
Yep. Good.
Yeah.
Sarah, it might be a good idea if you turned your video off too.
Off
Just leave
my
just leave
video, the incoming.
just turn your face off and just leave the screen on.
But not the other one.
That looks good now.
We can't hear you though. Maybe you should drop out and re-come in again.
The screen is frozen again.
Can see your face again.
Can you see my presentation now?
Yes,
And you're still seeing my face though?
yes.
Okay, so let's stop my video. Let's try that. Is that a bit better?
It sounds okay.
Okay, so can you see my presentation still?
Yeah, move your mouse.
It's good. Can you see me still?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, you can see your mouse.
And you can see the presentation slides?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So Rick Hansen started our organization in 1997, and the objective was to fulfill our vision of a wild white sturgeon population in the Fraser that's strong and sustainable. And that's a pretty tall order for this type of fish and in these times. But what's unique about the species and this particular population of white sturgeon is it's the last truly wild population of this species in the world, Fraser. So there's no interventions. We don't have hatcheries. So it's a very special population of the species that we have the opportunity still to protect and to see recover without other interventions. So in 2000, we started the Lower Fraser White Sturgeon Monitoring Assessment Program. That's our tagging program. And essentially we worked with volunteers across many sectors to encounter the sturgeon, tag them, take information, data about these fish, their size, growth, where they're located when they're encountered. And as you can see from these images, they're really quite a range of size. And when we're out there trying to tag these fish, you really have no idea what you're going to encounter when you're out there. And it's such an incredibly diverse population that uses so much of the river in so many different ways that there's a lot for us to learn. And there's been an amazing amount of work over the 20 years, but there's so much to learn. So as I said, there's volunteers from many sectors, guides, first fishers, really so different groups that have an interest in seeing the sustainability of this species overall. Our funding is primarily from various groups, government, some nonprofits and private foundations, but we really wouldn't be able to do this work if it wasn't for that type of support and the belief in the possibility that anything's possible, as Rick always says, that we can see the recovery of such a prehistoric species. So research and population status today and tomorrow. So I wanted to share with you a little bit about what the population's doing right now and where we're seeing it go for the future. Keeping in mind that this is a species that it's an apex species. So they eat everybody else. And they are one of the most significant species. They're like the canary in the coal mine. And so when you look at the health of the Fraser River, this is a species that really, if it's in trouble, then we're in trouble. And so it's very much become that icon when we're looking at the health of overall the river, but all the ecosystems throughout the entire watershed. So our work spans over 200 river kilometers in the Fraser River. We've separated out into 4 different sections. And this is so that we can really understand where the bulk of these fish are hanging out, what their fidelity is to certain areas, but we also have volunteers that span this significant amount of river kilometers. And so it gave us the ability to start to profile the population, starting with breaking it down this way. This is the population where it sits right now at 2020. We're still working on our 2021 numbers. So right now, this is what we see. So the black line at the top, that's the entire population that we've been sampling. The size range that we look at is between 60 centimeters and 279 centimeters. And so we had to give it those boundaries, but that doesn't mean that we don't have smaller fish. We have fish that are 25 centimeters and 40 centimeters. And we also have fish that are up in the 300 centimeters mark, but we needed to have that frame to give us that basic range to start with. The blue line are fish that are kind of that mid-range. They're just approaching maturity. And they give us a lot of hope because those fish, even though you can see this dip in the line, they are reasonably healthy. They are continuing to grow. The red line fish, those are the ones that are maturing. Those are the really big ones that they're the brood stock. They're the current brood stock that we have. And so those are the ones that are going to be producing the next generation. The green line is the one that we have the biggest concern about because those are the ones that are the juveniles. Those are the little ones that we should be seeing more and more of given the size of the brood stock. And so when you have so many fish that are in those bigger size classes that can produce all these little fish, there's a disproportionate number of large fish to the juveniles. We should see way more juveniles based on the size of the brood stock. So to date, we've put out over 70,000 tags. We've collected over 170,000 samples. The mark rate is about 74%. So that means that those are the fish, the recapture rate. So we do see some fish several times, and we have seen them several times over the 20 years of the program. Current estimate of the population abundance is about 44,930 fish. And we've also learned, thanks to all of this data, there's a huge confidence in this simply because we have so much information, we have so much data. But if we do nothing, the population declines in 30 years. And it sounds like 30 years is a long time, but it's really not in the life of a sturgeon that could be 200. So what you're seeing here is our forecast of what it's going to look like if we do nothing. If we don't do anything more, we don't protect any more habitat, we don't influence any more of the developments on the Fraser River, this is what happens. And so the overall abundance, that black line, it will just continue to decline. But there is hope. Originally my slide said, but wait, there's more. But actually it's really is that there's hope. There's more, but there's also hope for us. So the way this population model works, the way the abundance model works is it is projecting the trends based on fish that are alive right now. So we can look back based on fish alive right now, we can look back to what 20 years or 50 years looked like. Same goes for fish that are alive right now. With a conservative mortality rate, we can project what's going to happen in the next 30 or 50 years. And so it's really quite an extraordinary model. And because of the contribution of all our volunteers, it is one of the best baseline population models on an aquatic species in the world. So it's very unusual and very, very, it's a very special, it's an incredibly special program. And I get calls from everywhere in the world at any given point because of what we've achieved and how unique this is. But because of it, we can look at it and think, okay, if we can increase survival by 1 to 1.6 times, the abundance will actually increase. And so the chart you're seeing on the top, it's showing this is what our, if we were to increase it one time, based on the current recruitment, you will see it'll stabilize, it'll start to flatten out. But if we can increase survival by 1.6 times, so that's all those little fish, any of the middle-sized fish that are caught in gill nets, all of the fish overall, we will ultimately start to see an increase. So based on the analysis and based on our focus of seeing that long-term survival, the key issues remain habitat loss, gillnet, bycatch mortality, low numbers of the juveniles, which is affected through all of these, poaching, that's a very significant issue, and fisheries management overall. And so that refers to the fisheries practices, whether it's the large scale fishers, commercial fishers in the lower river, or if it's more the First Nations fishers that are in the upper part of the river, up here in the Fraser Valley, and everything in between, as well as the sport and recreational fishery that currently the provincial government that regulates it deems the population is healthy to sustain it, but it does require ongoing management. So really, at the end of the day, survival means more juveniles. That's what we need. We need to see those juveniles survive in the Hatzic Eddy, Matsqui, Hurling Island, and in particular, the Fraser Estuary. The Fraser Estuary down where in Delta is incredibly special in, as you were referring to, the salinity, what we call the salinity wedge, even though I know it's not a wedge, but that magic where the salt meets the fresh water, it's very special because all of those different bacteria, little life forms that all those little fish feed on, they happen in that special spot. So it's important for us. Spawning is critical, juvenile rearing, best handling practices for all fishers, as well as looking at innovative ways to apply new technologies to the research we do. So when we look at long-term use of habitat, spawning, juvenile rearing, I thought I would just talk a little bit about the impact of the floods in 2021. This was huge. It was huge for us here, as for everyone. But for fish, it also was huge. So the habitat was affected so incredibly significantly, even just looking at all of those salmon redds, everywhere that the salmon spawn in those in the gravel reach, on those beautiful gravel bars where they lay their eggs and bury them and they live in the gravel until the next season. All of that's been washed away. It's been destroyed by those floods. And so we don't know yet what truly the impact on the salmon population, as an example, to what will come back next year. But we do know that it will have an impact on sturgeon if the food supply is low and we don't have the salmon returns. Then the sturgeon don't have the nutrient load that they need to spawn or to continue to grow. So it really has such far-reaching realities. Obviously, in respect for the people and farmers and people lost so much, the long-term losses I think are yet still to be determined, but they will be significant in the aquatic habitat. This is a snapshot of what, prior to the floods, this is what Hurling Island looked like, the Hurling Island channel, where we've proven there's spawning, there's been development, there's been farming going on there. There's been a huge issue for us and to protect the spawning area. But I wanted to show you this because now this has been essentially washed away because those floods were so powerful. But what's special about this type of habitat and why it's so critical and so key for us now to be investigating what the now current status of the new reality or the new normal of the habitat is, that you can see there's larger cobble, there's smaller cobble. All of those spaces in there are critical for those small sturgeon because they can go in there and hide. The larvae can go in there and hide. The eggs can stick into there and they're protected from predation. Sturgeon are unique in that they hatch over 6 days, just in about 6 or 7 days. So that's not a long gestation. And then they're larvae. So they're already very vulnerable to predation right in those early days. And so this is the kind of habitat that's essentially been impacted by those floods. We also, as I mentioned before, we have other priority areas like best handling practices for everyone, for all fishers. The recreational and sport fishing community came together with us, as well as with biologists and scientists, as well as the regulators, to come up with handling guidelines. So as I mentioned, the population is deemed healthy enough to sustain a sport and recreational fishery, provided the fishers are subscribing to and adopting these guidelines and these practices to encounter these amazing fish. The other piece that's really important is that in our data collection, we chose rod and reel, so angling, to collect our data because the science shows that that is the least invasive way to encounter these fish, to collect the data we need and release them quickly with the least amount of harm. And it's been measured across a number of different scientific methods, and this one still remains, angling still remains the best way that we can collect data without harming these fish. We worked with the provincial government as well as received funding from the Habitat Conservation Trust Foundation to actually produce a little video that shows, and this is on our website and you can see it there. It's again, a little bit of a play on words, that can you handle it, to help people understand how to manage their experience with sturgeon, but also can you really handle it, because you really don't know what you're going to be receiving on the end of that line. And it can be quite an extraordinary experience. And so we work together to create a very visual way to explain this is what you need to do in order to prepare, and then hopefully, if you're lucky, encounter these fish. The commercial and First Nations gillnet fishery is such a significant cause of bycatch mortality because of the bycatch in these nets. The sturgeon aren't targeted per se, but because these nets are out fishing salmon, and salmon get caught in the nets, and then the sturgeon come down for the buffet of salmon, the sturgeon get caught in the nets as well, and it causes huge impacts to these populations just simply by being intercepted. New ways of either using this technology or finding new technology to still achieve the goal of the salmon harvest, but not at the detriment of sturgeon. We look at innovative technologies for recovery, and I love sharing this part of the story because we received a suggestion from our amazing leader, Rick Hansen, and he was at a conference that was looking at some high resolution sonar, side scan sonar. So you can see here that you can see sturgeon. These are scanned sturgeon that we were able to capture these images of, but the technology was innovative because it wasn't initially designed for fisheries. The technology that you're seeing here was actually originally designed by for the Coast Guard for body recovery and search and rescue. And Rick thought if you could find somebody, then you could find a fish, these big fish. So if you could find a 5 to 6 foot person, maybe you could also find a 5 or 6 foot fish, and you could determine habitat without actually encountering them or interfering with them. And so looking at technologies and applying them in new ways is also going to help us to protect habitat and identify where they're hanging out and why. So ultimately, for the recovery of this species, what will it take? Well, it's exactly what we're trying to do, which is action and advocacy. We use our data and information and our science to support the design of development. So development plans before they're committed to. We also encourage abstaining from fishing in sensitive areas when we've proven that there's spawning there. So our data helps to do that as well. We also share our data right across a number of industries that have interests in developing the Fraser and areas along the Fraser to help ensure that any decisions that are being made are made with information that they're informed decisions, basically. And because we're a research organization and we work in data and analysis and evidence, we've become that go-to organization that is relied upon for very, unbiased, clear, credible information when it comes to the ecosystem and then what it means for development. And we're working actively with the provincial government and the federal government on a watershed-wide sturgeon plan. And this is critical. And again, as I mentioned, sturgeon being an apex species and iconic, the idea of a watershed-wide plan is vital to all species that are in this ecosystem, but sturgeon being the pinnacle. It's bringing together a lot of people to buy into and support and then use this plan to protect key habitat. And we're getting there. We're making a difference, and we're trying to every day be better and do more, but we are getting there. Thanks to the folks that work with us, volunteers and leaders and communities in all areas of sturgeon interests. We keep our research going and our data is continuously relied upon to monitor the status of the population as well as identify key issues. Advocacy and collaboration, we do work with a number of other groups that are advocating for ecosystems and different protections, and we can use our data and our support to help others in that collaborative effort. Best practices with the catch and release fishery is, as I mentioned, and also best practices with the gillnet fisheries. We work with First Nations throughout the Fraser Valley to come up with different ways of using current and then also new technologies. And people can help. We are always looking for help, whether it's to inspire our local governments, municipal and provincial and federal governments to pay attention to the ecosystems and the importance, but also to help raise awareness and tell the story. And thanks to Elizabeth's invitation and Jim's help, that's partly where I come in, to be able to help share the story of what we do. And yeah, that's pretty much what we do and how we do it. And I'm so sorry about the technical glitches for you folks, but I'm happy to answer your questions. And thank you so much for inviting me to share my story.
Thank you so much, Sarah. That was very interesting. I'm going to see if I can. Okay, I'll try to unmute myself without having to hold that bar down. I see we do have some questions here. Paul's got a good question. How do they eat everything in the river when they don't have any teeth?
I actually get that question I get that question very frequently. I'm just going to turn my video off so I don't lose anybody in this part. But so sturgeon eat like a vacuum. So they have extending mouth that basically sucks up what they're after, kind of like a Hoover, like a vacuum cleaner, basically. And inside their mouth, they also have pressure plates that will crush clam shells and crabs and things like that. So they don't technically chew, but they can put pressure to break up their food as well. They primarily will feed on carcasses, but they are known to go after live food as well.
Okay, thanks. And I see Annie is back with us. Welcome back, Annie. Her first question is it all catch and release? I think.
Yep, it is 100%. There is this is a non-retention fishery. The fishery itself is very heavily regulated. So if you are going to go and encounter them, you use nice heavy tackle, because you never know how big the fish is that you might see. But also we use single barbless hooks. And so it doesn't mangle the fish's mouth. The hooks slip out very easily. The fish can spit them out themselves time to time, which happens. Makes it a little harder for data collection, but the fish have got to have a chance too. So it is a very, very heavily regulated fishery, but it is 100% non-retention. We do deal with poaching issues, but because it's non-retention, it makes it a little easier for us to deal with poaching because it's obvious.
And Annie had another question as well. Know they're being tagged, and being so, does the data show how far they travel, or do they stay only in a certain area?
Well, the answer is yes. Being a prehistoric species, they are, like I said, they're opportunistic. So we have parts of the population that we've seen that leave the river. They'll go out to ocean. They'll spend months and months, sometimes years out in the ocean, or then they'll come back and we won't see them for 5 years or 10 years. We have other fish that we see every other year. It really depends. And I compare it sometimes a little bit to bees, which I know is weird because it's not an insect, but bees have scouts that go out and check stuff out and come back. And I think in some ways, there are some parts of the sturgeon population that are similar, that they're adventurous. They go out, check it out, they come back, they look for food, they come back, and others just hang out because it's comfy and there's food there and they don't leave. So it's actually not that dissimilar to people, really, if you think about it.
Okay, and Peter Ward's question is, why are the fish in the medium age class doing badly?
The challenge with the ones in that mid-size class is most of the population is continuing to grow. So they'll keep getting bigger, and that's the good news. The challenge is that those mid-size fish, that's the size of the fish that typically get tangled up in gill nets. And the size of the mesh on the gill nets is very, it's detrimental to the size of that specific size of sturgeon. And so we are working really hard to encourage the First Nation and commercial fishers to check their nets really regularly, because if the fish is released as soon as possible, it has the greatest chance of survival, those sorts of things. But generally that's why. It's because it's very conducive to being caught in a gill net, and that's why they get caught. And that's why they're having a challenge.
Thank you. Yeah, that's good.
Thanks. And Joe Stevenson was asking if the mid-class are escaping to the ocean.
Yes, sometimes they're just hanging out here, but because they can do salt and fresh water, they go where there's food. Again, this is a dinosaur fish. This fish is really truly hardwired to survive. So if they need to leave for a while because that's where the food is, or the conditions aren't really conducive to survival of a spawn, that's what they'll do. They'll just, to our knowledge. But if you think about a 200-year-old fish, and we've been studying them for just over 20 years, we got a little ways to go.
And David Noreen asking, has the aquaculture of sturgeon complicated the poaching issue? The sturgeon is available in markets?
I love that question. And I always wait to see if someone will ask me that one. So thank you. It's the thing about British Columbia and the sturgeon that you see in markets or you'll see on a restaurant menu, that it is, well, first of all, always ask where your food came from. That's the first question. The second thing is that the aquaculture programs in British Columbia, as well as in Idaho, that supply these markets, these are contained facilities. These are some of the best examples. If you're going to have a fish farm, this is how you want to do it. It's away from the ocean, it's away from watersheds, it's away from everything, it's totally contained. And you can track the fish from the point of the hatchery through to the market. Now, that said, there's an argument I hear often that if you make it available in markets, does that continue to stimulate the appetite then for this fish? But the reality is the appetite for this fish is long, in way like the 1400s, 1700s. You'll hear references to sturgeon, whether it's Napoleon or it's the Queen Victoria, whatever. It's such a long-standing piece of our culture and our community. So by having the fish markets, having a sustainable option that does not impact the natural habitat helps to mitigate the poaching side. But because it's known, we also then work with enforcement to make sure that the markets that are carrying them are carrying what they say they are. And so it's actually puts it out front as opposed to keeping it in the back room. Hope that answers your question.
I have a question, if it's okay. And thank you, Sarah. I'm thoroughly enjoying this. I'm a marine biologist by trade. So without really knowing that we're all conservationists and we work hand.
You're cutting out, Elta.
Sorry, I'm losing you a little bit. I can't quite hear.
Elta seems frozen.
Don't know. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll be short and succinct without delving into the political component. Being a marine biologist myself, can you speak around your thoughts or share your thoughts about fish farms who are actually raising or cultivating these fish to sell the actual meat and the caviar in Europe?
Sorry, so they're being raised here and shipped to Europe, or?
Yes, they're being raised here. They're being, the caviar is being harvested, the
Yeah.
fish meat is being harvested, and they're selling that internationally. Just your thoughts on that, knowing that we're conservationists and we're looking at the natural habitat. What are your thoughts on that from that end?
So I've worked very closely with the folks that run Northern Divine
Okay.
Caviar,
Yeah,
which is a
yeah.
sea shelt.
That's right.
And
Yeah.
that facility is extraordinary, that place. And I've been there a number of times. And in fact, we've actually shared information because there's certain things you can see in captivity with fish and behavior that you can't see in the wild, and vice versa. So we've it's been a challenge because there's a lot of folks in my conservation world that just simply believe that all aquaculture is bad and evil, and so therefore it shouldn't exist. But our approach is, if there's a way of doing that protects that does protect the natural habitat, and I'm certainly not suggesting that all farms do, because they don't. This one and the way that sturgeon's being raised and managed here is very unique. And I think it's a world-class example, also because it's teaching the conservation side of the wild. So they have the investment in the wild as well as producing this product that is organic. These animals are organically fed. They have almost a zero carbon footprint, just simply because the animals heat the water themselves, and they have all use of all of the products from these animals. Again, it's unusual. I don't think that it's the norm. I think they're the exception. But I think if you have an example like that can set a standard, then it gives me hope for aquaculture in other areas, because the reality is it's here, it's with us. I'm very, very proud of the fact that the Fraser River is not facing currently a hatchery program to repopulate it. If we can do our job right, if we can do it right, and we can do what we need to do, then we have a chance still. We don't have to resort to that fallback that is quite often the fallback for solving fisheries issues, is simply pump a bunch of fish in. So I think there's space for both, but I think it's very critical that these standards are held very high and that they're very heavily monitored. And we've been very active with both the provincial and federal governments on the regulation side of that particular type of farm. There's been other applications throughout the Fraser Valley for farms for sturgeon that fortunately we've been able to suggest are not necessarily the best plan, and protected some key areas. So I hope that answers your question. It's a really tricky one. It's one that is it's got a lot of different dimensions, and I hope that helps answer it. But if you ever want to see that and experience that kind of an amazing facility there, I would really encourage you to go there. The biologists that run there, that we're in quite frequent contact with, they're really open to share, and they're just really, it's a neat place.
Yeah.
And you can see some pretty amazing fish really up close without having a fish farm.
Yeah. No, that's perfect, Sarah. Thank you so very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, so we do have more questions. Anita's asking about the impacts of Roberts Bank Terminal 2 on sturgeon in the Lower Fraser Estuary, which leads me to a question. I see that the Port of Vancouver is one of your funders.
That is correct. So we're working with them to assess the environment there, and their interest in us and the work we do with them is actually to be protecting those habitats that could be impacted by developments and actions and works that they do. And so it's an interesting project, and it's interesting work that we do with them, because yeah, they're in the business of running the port and we're in the business of protecting fish. And so they also, and the biologist, the head biologist that we work with there is absolutely committed to making sure that anything they're doing is not going to make a negative impact on sturgeon in the areas we're working with them. I don't know enough about Roberts Creek to comment specifically on that project, but the areas, for example, that we're working with, here's a great example. So we use side scan sonar, that fancy sonar that shows you this beautiful fish pictures. We use that in many of these areas with the port in conjunction of when they're actually in the water trying, like going to do their works, whether it's pile driving, whether it's dredging, whatever it is. And if there's fish in the area, they stop work and we wait. And often the fish, they swim, they're going to leave, they move, they leave, and they resume work. So it's, the Sturgeon Society is not against industry and we're not against development per se, provided both are being done with the best information available and done in a responsible way. So again, I don't know enough about Roberts Creek or Roberts Bank, sorry. And all I know is that it's been really impressive to work with the port, and our information isn't always necessarily helpful to their plans, but it's real, and we're telling them what the science really says. So I hope that kind of answers your question. I'm not 100% sure it did, but that's kind of how our relationship works. And that lower part of the river is a special part of the river. It is a concern for us. It's the same as with the Massey Tunnel and the plans around any developments, any plan that they decide on, that they land on with that is, that's a big concern and a big focus of ours as well to be monitoring. So we're looking at all of it.
Yeah, there's a lot going on in the Lower Fraser, not just Roberts Bank Terminal 2. None of it good for the environment, I think.
It definitely has very, very serious implications and realities, and for different species. And I can only really speak on sturgeon. I'm not as familiar with the bird life or others, but I know that there are some special spots down there that sturgeon need that will be impacted depending on what development looks like and what they do. Also understanding that this area is very industrial and it has been for many, many years. Mm-hmm. And the fish, they're dinosaurs. They just find where they need to go.
They seem to be doing relatively well.
We're working on it.
Yeah, and we do have some more questions. Before we get on to some of the other questions, there's just something I wanted to ask. Is the reproductive age, is it only between age 23 and 55?
No, they will keep producing. They do slow down as they get older, and they slow down their growth. They slow down everything, kind of like people too, I guess.
Yeah.
You know, I have twin teenagers, and it feels slower every day. But yeah, so they will produce till they're quite old. But they will do it, like I said, they'll do it about every 6 to 10 years in the wild, and that will slow down as they get older. But it also depends on the conditions. So if there's not enough food around and they know it, then they'll hold on to their eggs or they'll reabsorb them and they'll wait another year or so before they do it. So again, that's a huge thing for habitat and the things you're talking about, because if the habitat and the environmental cues are telling them that it's not a good time to spawn, then they won't. Now you've got another issue with the habitat and with the species, right? So.
Yeah. Okay, David and Noreen, another question. Is a decline in Ulican impacting the sturgeon population?
I think that the decline in Ulican, so Ulican is a huge favorite, both for people and for sturgeon. Ulican, salmon, particularly sockeye salmon, chum salmon, the declines in those populations overall do have a negative impact on sturgeon. We're seeing lower growth rates, and the lower growth rate years are correlating with those losses, those lower runs of salmon and Ulican. So there is a direct relationship, we believe, with that food supply to the growth of the fish, and that ultimately is a negative impact. So.
Okay, thanks. And Carol and Paul, hang on a second, Jim. I'll just get this question first and then I'll get back to you. Carol and Paul asking, do you collect and determine the cause of death for sturgeon that do not survive?
To the best of our ability, yes. So so quite often I'll get a phone call from somebody who's found one of these beautiful animals, and if it works, I can get a volunteer, one of our volunteers. So we have volunteers that sample our fish right from the mouth right up past Yale. So there's a lot of different people that are out there. Sometimes they're on the water more often than not, but I do have people out there that I can phone, and they'll have a look at the fish, they'll measure it, they'll get as close as they can, depending on the decomposition, of course. But the biggest thing is they'll scan them for a tag. And so if that is one of our fish that is sampled and does have a tag, then that helps us to get a better picture overall of the health of the species and the story of that fish. Then that goes back into our database. So yes, we do the best we can to try to determine cause of death, as well as the overall health, and then if it happens to have a tag.
Okay. And I think Jim Ronback was waving his hand there.
Yeah, oh, there we go. How susceptible are the sturgeon to boat traffic, to their propellers and to pollutants that might be dispensed into the river?
So sturgeon are, they are a large, long-lived species. So similar to tuna or other large species, yes, they're going to acquire they're going to take on mercury or pollutants and stuff. We don't scan for that. We don't look at that specifically in terms of the water chemistry that they're in. But in terms of the prop strikes, we do have incidences pretty much every year, several every year, where we can see that the fish either died and then was hit with a prop, or it was hit with a prop and then died. But we don't always know which came first because it's hard to tell. But we do know that in previous times, the idea was that sturgeon were just bottom feeders and they didn't come up close to the surface. So it didn't make any sense why they would have a prop strike. But we've since learned that they use the whole water column because they're looking for food. So they are vulnerable to it, but it's rare. We don't see it super frequently. I think the vibrations of the traffic deter them before they would get too close typically.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Okay, Annie has a comment, not a question, but she's saying that it sounds like the sturgeon farm would be a good field trip for Delta gnats. And I think she's probably right. This is probably not the right time to do it. But once it's a little safer for people to be congregating a bit more, then actually might be a very nice thing to do.
Yeah, I would encourage it. And if there's anything I can do to help facilitate that for you and introduce you to some folks there, I'm happy to do that. It truly is a very, very unique place. It's a very special place there.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, does anyone else have other questions before we wrap up? Not.
Are you participating in commenting on the Delta Port 2 project?
The Petula, is that what you said?
Delta Port 2, the huge island that's going to be constructed, how that might affect the sturgeon population?
We're involved in the sense of, we're asked for data, we're asked for information. We do make recommendations on, I like to call it the no, but yes. No, don't do this, but yes, do it this way if you have to. And our biologists and researchers that we work with do try to find those, those options. We're involved with a number of projects because of the nature of the data that we have and our ability to interpret it and be very, very space or location specific. So in that particular case, we would be asked for sturgeon habitat usage in that area. Again, that's not specific to other species that could use it, that would be more vulnerable in that case. But a lot of those areas in the lower part of the river, with the exception of the slower paced water in the estuaries, and that they're thoroughfares. The fish are traveling through there primarily. And so they're easy to move out of the way as opposed to other species like maybe ulican or waterfowl or others that could be more negatively impacted with being having a high fidelity in certain areas and a sustained presence as opposed to sturgeon, the way sturgeon would behave.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, I have comment, and Anita's saying that this has been very interesting, and thanking you. Peter Ward wanted to know why the sturgeon went into the flooded Sumas Prairie in November.
You know, that's a little bit like, why did the chicken cross the road? I don't actually know the answer to that. What I can tell you is that the Sumas Prairie, it used to be a lake. It was previously, that was water. It's pumped out and it was made farmland. And so actually, in some ways, you'd almost think sturgeon were going home because they used to live there. And they were the ones that were moved out of the way for the agriculture. You know what? They just got washed in there. The reality is those floods hit so hard and so fast. They were washed into a number of areas, including little pools and back channels that some of our volunteers were going into just to try to help them get back to the main part of the river. So it's really hard to say, but I think it's likely they just got washed in there because of the power of those waters. And the beautiful thing again about the species is that, you know, they can survive for quite a while in conditions like that. They can survive for quite a while out of water or in mud or where there's limited moisture, just because of, again, the nature of what they are. But fortunately, we had some folks that were there that were paying attention to fish as well, and were able.
Thank you.
Okay, and Annie Capps is saying that Sumas Lake has historical photos of the sturgeon there, so I guess you're right, they are going home again.
They're just going home. I remember my grandmother telling me about when they first drained it and the farmers were tilling the soil and they were turning over sturgeon deep in the mud, and they were like a year after the draining of the lake. So they're extraordinary. And yeah, I think in some ways they were going home. They knew where it was.
Yeah. Okay, and Jim, Nisha, and Anita have a couple of comments here. They're not exactly conflicting, but following from each other. Because Jim is asking about the proposed LNG plant at Tilbury and any impact that might have. And Anita's saying that the plant's already there. They're just expanding the storage facility. Do you see
You're
that?
talking, sorry, you were breaking up there for a second. I didn't quite catch
sorry.
it.
Okay, sorry. The expansion of the storage facility for LNG, the Fortis facility.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Tilbury.
Yeah.
Do you see that having a negative impact?
Actually, there's aspects of that to my knowledge, and we are working with them as well in some of these areas. The interesting thing about that project is, first of all, that whole area has been so, the natural environment has been so bastardized over the past 70 years that really there's very little anything that you'd want to call natural there anymore. So that's one factor. The fact that they could be looking at dredging some really nice big deep holes, sturgeon love that. They love the deep holes to go and hang out in. The food just rolls down the floor of the river into the hole and they don't have to make work for it. It comes to them. So there's aspects of that project that will actually create, or at least, well, it's not really, you can't create habitat. It's like trying to plant a forest. I understand that, but it gives opportunity for the fish that maybe doesn't currently exist or previously existed, but now doesn't because of siltation and other things. So the other piece of that is where that facility is actually going is not, it's not known habitat. We've had guys trying to collect data regularly around there, and it's not a popular spot. It's very sandy there. They don't typically hang out. So it's one of those areas that in that actual spot, it's not likely to have a big impact. The bigger concern we look at is what happens upstream and downstream. So those are the parts that we're really focusing on with them, and what do those changes do to the hydromorphology, for example, of the water of the river, and what does that do to the fish? So, which we don't know yet. We're working with them to help to determine that and help to influence the plans so that it doesn't cause more damage.
Yeah. Okay, does that answer your questions, Jim and Anita?
I guess I was primarily more interested in the large ships trying to move through the river and turn around for the expanded plant. The plant is probably not a big concern. It's mainly the large ship traffic of the large LNG container ships.
So we've been so Fortis and the developers, the whole Tilbury, it's gone through so many different names, pardon me, but we've sat in on presentations. They've presented to us a number of occasions, and the boat traffic, the size traffic, the increased traffic, where they're going and how far they can go is unlikely to have a very significant impact. But we are still, like I said, we are still looking at, just because you have the traffic, what does that do downstream? What does it do upstream? And so we're still trying to assess that with them to figure out what impacts on other parts of the habitat, because again, sturgeon may not be affected, but there could be other wildlife and other aquatic species that are affected by that traffic. In terms of prop strikes and that sort of thing, it's really hard to say because the traffic has been increasing over the years and we've not seen an exponential increase in the numbers of prop strikes. So it's really hard to say.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anybody else? Well, I think you can probably tell from the number of questions you've had, Sarah, that people were very interested in your presentation.
Well, I really appreciate it. Like I said, I love this stuff, and again, I'm sorry for the audio glitches and that, but I'll talk to anybody and everybody who will listen to me. And so I'm just so grateful for the reach out and the invitation to speak with you and share this story and, you know, share it with others, tell others. It's a very connected species to all these areas that we're all concerned about. So if there's anything we can do and anything that I can share that contributes to what you guys are doing as well, and I'm here, and I really don't hesitate to reach out to me.
Okay, thank you so much, Sarah.
All right, thank you, everybody. Really nice to meet you.
Okay, folks, I think we're done for tonight. Next meeting is February 1st. And we'll have James Casey from Birds Canada talking about climate adaptation and shorebirds. And if that doesn't make any sense to you, what he's talking about here is the fact that governments are talking about increasing the height of dikes, you know, shoring up shorelines to make it safer for people and property. But he wants to make sure that in that process, they don't lose track of the fact that they need to leave foraging areas for shorebirds. And I think we can be pretty sure that if they're not pushed, they will forget that. So I think that's pretty much going to be the basis of James's talk. I haven't seen it, of course, so we'll see, but that's pretty much where he's coming from. So, oh, okay, Valerie's had a final comment there. Thank you, your work is impressive. That's for Sarah. Okay, I think that's it, everybody. Anybody have any questions? Any of the executives? Anita, no? Just waving. Annie, it's nice to see you back again.
Thank
Good
you.
night, everyone.
Good night, everybody.
Night, everyone.
Good night.